Good evening. This is two-way tonight. All right. Thank you for joining. Appreciate everybody being part of what has been an extraordinary news day, both in the public eye, where the six-ring circus confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill, and then, of course, the the extraordinarily historic Middle East peace deal, whether it holds or not, it's an historic event. Those have kind of been the two big stories today. The California fires, of course, continue to be a story. I have been working, and sometimes I like to take you a little bit behind the scenes, right into my reporter's notebook, as if we're a tiny little dollhouse size people, and my notebook is some giant thing the size of a condominium. I've been working all day on a story about Vice President Harris and a story on the Obamas. I'm not ready to report either of them, but it's taken up a portion of my day, I will admit to you. And so I am normally pretty decisive about what I want to share and what I want to organize our conversation around. But tonight it's going to be a little bit of free flowing, and I'm almost certain some news is going to break during the show. I can't tell you why, but stay with me for this roller coaster of an hour as we'll talk about what's going on. As I said, Republican strategist Beverly Hallberg is here. She'll join us. We may have a surprise guest too that Lori Blackford doesn't even know about. So stay tuned for that. But I'll run through the news, and then, as always, we'll want your questions and comments. Please, particularly if you've never raised your hand and be part of the conversation, love for you to do that today. Raise your electronic hand and say, "Call on me, call on me." Don't say that aloud, just think it. If you're watching on YouTube or on X, fantastic. Thanks for being part of this. As always, peace, love, and understanding, the presumption of grace. Do not write smack in the chat. As you know, I almost never read the chat, but I'm told it's less smacky than it used to be. So that's a good sign. Even the comments on X have become almost lovable and loving, which is extraordinary because that's not what X is usually about. So we're all at two-way very pleased that people are understanding that we're doing something a little bit different here. Conversations to educate, to get people to think, to expose people to what's going on the other side. And that's a little bit different than some other media. So thank you again for joining. All right. The Middle East peace deal is a huge deal. And of course, tonight, President Biden at 8 Eastern time, an hour after we finish visiting together, is giving his farewell address. And he's almost certainly going to talk more. He already talked earlier today about the deal. It's a fascinating story of this transition. Most important is whether the deal holds and whether the hostages come out and how the second stage it's enacted. As you know, the deal involves release of hostages maybe this Sunday. There's some question about whether the Israelis will approve the deal, but most political and diplomatic analysts suspect that they will. So phase one seems like it's going to an effect. There will be hostages, including a couple of Americans released. And then we'll see what happens. Some of the thornier issues, even the parties acknowledge, have not fully been worked out. And that includes the question of what happens on the ground in Gaza. If there is a ceasefire, aid is supposed to go in. There's supposed to be some sort of peacekeeping. There's supposed to be some sort of new government there. All of that has been a huge part of the stumbling block of getting to the deal. And of course, implementation of phase two will fall solely from the United States perspective, not on the Biden administration, but on the Trump administration. Part of why this deal is so fascinating from an American domestic political perspective is because it really did require both the current administration and the incoming administration to get it done. The metaphor that I've been using is a jar of pickles that you can't get open. And one guy, Joe Biden, has been trying to get the lid off the pickle jar for a long time, and he can't quite get it off. It's still stuck on there. And then the other guy comes in and opens it right up. Joe Biden says he never would have been able to open that jar if I hadn't loosened the lid. And Donald Trump says, I did it. So, on one level, extraordinary cooperation. I wouldn't say unprecedented, but pretty close to it, with negotiators for both Biden and Trump in Doha, finishing up this deal, working side by side, giving each other credit. And you'll see in a moment, some people in the administration are giving Donald Trump credit. Donald Trump on Truth Social basically taking all the credit, no surprise there. And there's an argument on his side, which is Joe Biden had a long time to try to get this deal in place and couldn't get it over the finish line. Donald Trump demanded it be done. And I think there's no doubt that Donald Trump has an argument to make on that. On the other hand, there was a deal that was teed up by Joe Biden and his team. So I think it's a great story of cooperation. And they've cooperated. I've reported previously they're cooperating on Iran, what to do about Iran at this point, both because Iran is weaker than it's been, and therefore the U.S. and Israel have an opportunity to strike at Iran and the development of Iran's nuclear program. That's another area of cooperation. There may be others that we don't know about. I've been probing on that. But in this case, the level of cooperation has not been absolute, at least rhetorically. As I said, President Trump on Truth Social taking, I would say, all the credit, close to all the credit for getting the deal in place. Joe Biden, State Department official, today gave some credit to Donald Trump. Please roll 7.
When it comes to the involvement of President-elect Trump's team, it has been absolutely critical in getting this deal over the line. And it's been critical because, obviously, as I stand here today, this administration's term in office will expire in 5 days. And one of the things that we have always said about this deal is that when you get from stage 1 to stage 2, that the United States, Egypt, and Qatar are the guarantors of this deal. And Egypt and Qatar will push Hamas to stay at the bargaining table and to get from stage 1 to stage 2, and the United States will push Israel to stay at the bargaining table to get from phase 1 and phase 2. So obviously those are promises we cannot make on behalf of the United States for any longer than the next 5 days. And so it's critical that all of the parties to the agreement and the other mediators see that when the United States is in the room making commitments, those are lasting commitments that extend beyond this administration into the next one. I would just say, lastly, I don't know if it's unprecedented to have envoys from an outgoing and an incoming administration sitting at the same table negotiating a ceasefire agreement of this kind. But if it's not unprecedented, it's certainly unusual. And we, of course, thank the Trump team for working with this on this ceasefire agreement. We think it's important that they were at the table. And
So that's Matt Miller. He's now the State Department spokesman, previously Justice Department spokesman in the Obama years. Incredibly smart guy and very politically savvy. And you saw him there on a couple of occasions in that soundbite giving credit to Donald Trump, unambiguous. And so you might say there's extraordinary, despite the political differences between the two camps, there's been extraordinary effort made in that instance to give credit. However, Matt Miller's boss, President Biden, spoke at the White House about the deal, and then got asked about the kind of the core, political question, gossipy question. Who deserves the credit? Is it Joe Biden or Donald Trump? Let's roll that, please. Number 6.
Credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
Less credit there, right? There was ways to handle that besides sarcasm and indignity. So we'll see. We'll see what he says tonight. And there's obviously lots of reporting that you'll see in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and elsewhere in the coming days as to how this all exactly happened. But I think it's, again, fair to say it would not have happened without the two presidents. Fair to say that if not for Donald Trump, it would not have gotten over the finish line. We shall see. All right. On Capitol Hill, we could spend an hour on each of the 6 hearings. I've been lobbied all day by different people to emphasize different parts of the hearing, some from a journalistic point of view, some from a partisan point of view. But I think the Rubio hearing for Secretary of State is most interesting for how supportive many of the Democrats on the committee were and are of Senator Rubio, their colleague, but also his growth as a national figure since he entered the Senate, I think, has been quite striking. Presidential campaign, helped in some ways, although diminished his reputation, as often happens when people run for president and don't do particularly well. But there's genuine appreciation amongst the senators of both parties for having one of their own as Secretary of State and having someone whose worldview on some of the thornier questions kind of sits astride both, or straddles, I should say, both the MAGA, America First point of view, as well as more traditional Republican orthodoxy on some of these issues. So that hearing was close to a love fest. The one that has gotten the most attention is Pam Bondi for Attorney General. I'm going to show you some clips from that, but I'll tell you what I heard from Democrats all day, very similar to what I heard yesterday from Democrats regarding the Democratic senator's performance in the Pete Hegseth hearing, which is Democrats appear to be largely fighting an old war, the previous war, using the same tactics and strategy they used to fight it, which is to say, They're raising issues that they tried to raise against Donald Trump in the context of the 2024 campaign, and they weren't enough to beat him. Pam Bondi is, and all the nominees today came in, like Heg said, very well prepared, determined to have a combination of accommodation and deference to the Senate, but when challenged, we're ready to push back. So the main interlocutor for Pam Bondi, who produced a lot of attention, is Adam Schiff, the new senator from California, and who, as you know, for MAGA is one of the most detested Democrats from his time in the House. And Adam Schiff today, I would say, did nothing to endear himself to the good people of Mar-a-Lago in his colloquies with Pam Bondi, the nominee for Attorney General. I could show you 10 bites from this thing, but let's look at him asking about whether there be an investigation of Jack Smith, the special counsel #1, please.
The president has said Jack Smith should go to jail. Will you investigate Jack Smith?
Senator, I haven't seen the file. I haven't seen the investigation. I haven't looked at anything. It would be irresponsible of me to make a commitment regarding anything without, you're a long practicing attorney, without looking at a file.
So you would need a factual predicate to open an investigation of Jack Smith, is that right?
Not a summary by you sitting here. Yes, sir.
And not a summary by the president either, right?
Absolutely.
So a summary by the president or his desire to investigate Jack Smith would not be enough for you to open an investigation of Jack Smith, is that right?
I will look at the facts and evidence in any case. You know,
and sitting here today,
Senator, 72% of Americans
I only have
have
7
lost
minutes.
faith in the Department of Justice.
Sitting here today, are you aware of any factual predicate to investigate Jack Smith? Sitting here today, yes or no?
Senator, I will look at the facts and the circumstances.
You can't answer that question.
Brought to me.
You're not a part of the department yet. There's no worry about divulging
I'm sitting
law
here as a
enforcement
nominee.
sensitive information. So just tell us,
I'm
are you
sitting here as
aware?
a nominee.
Just tell us, are you aware of a factual predicate to investigate Jack Smith? Yes or no?
Senator, what I'm hearing on the news
Are
is
you aware
horrible.
of a?
Do I know if he committed a crime? I have not looked
You seem reluctant to answer a simple question. Let me ask you a different simple question.
Eek. All right. Here's more simple questions from Adam Schiff. #2, please.
Asking you, sitting here today, whether you are aware of a factual predicate to investigate Liz Cheney.
Senator, no one
Based
has
on
asked
what you
me
know.
to investigate Liz Cheney. That is a
The
hypothetical.
president has called for it publicly. You are aware of that, aren't you?
No one has asked me to investigate.
But the president
Liz.
has
We're
called-
also
the
worried about
president-
Liz Cheney,
the
Senator.
president has
You know what
called
we
for
should
this-
be worried about?
Ms. Bondi,
the
please
crime rate
answer
in
my
California
questions.
right now
You are
is
aware,
through the roof.
Ms. Bondi,
Your robberies
Ms.
are
Bondi,
87%
my
higher
question-
than the national
my question
average.
is this.
That's what I
My
want to
question
be
is
focused
this.
on,
Do
Senator.
you have the
if I'm
power to
confirmed
say
as
no to the
Attorney
president?
General.
Ooh. Okay. Again, argumentative and bantering, or not bantering, but jousting. But these are not issues that a lot of Democrats said to me today. Like, what is in it for us? This line of questioning is not going to, as Dan Tarantine pointed out this morning, that line of questioning is not going to keep Republicans from voting to confirm her. And in fact, Adam Schiff doing stuff like that's probably make Republicans rally around her even more. And the American people it's just not an issue that most people would care about. So it's a little bit confusing what the strategy there is. Now, the one Democrat on the Judiciary Committee who I heard from several people they thought did quite well, acquitted herself quite well, was Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. Let's look at a little of that. #4, please.
Yet you have a nominee from this incoming administration, Kash Patel, the pick to head the FBI, have serious concerns about him, has referred to the FBI's Intel Division, which is responsible for protecting us from foreign adversaries like China, as, quote, the biggest problem the FBI has had, and he said that he wants to, quote, break that component out of the FBI. Do you agree?
I have not seen those comments from Mr. Patel. I would review them, but we have to do everything we can to protect our country. Again, Mr. Patel would fall under me and the Department of Justice, and I will ensure that all laws are followed, and so will he.
Okay. There are many decisions made by the FBI director, having seen a number of them do their work, that can be made. While I agree you would be the boss of Kash Patel, I'm not sure that you would be able to intervene with every decision or position that he had or know what he's doing. So let's continue.
All right. So again, that's good oversight, right? That's part of what this is about, is to put down the record of what kind of job she would do in that. And we've seen in recent years, particularly with Jim Comey in the Obama administration, we've seen FBI directors make decisions. Comey made a very high profile one in the investigation of Hillary Clinton without checking with the head of the Justice Department, the Attorney General. So I'm glad that she's asking about that, because I don't want there to be ambiguity about the relationship between the head of the FBI and the Attorney General. 4 more confirmation hearings. Again, nothing in them that I'll spend time showing you, but all the nominations appear to be on track. And again, as we talked about this morning with Team Hegseth, it seems like they're pretty well organized there, that they have a good sense of how to build a team, how to prepare the nominee, how to coordinate with the Republican senators on the questioning. I want to hold off on a couple topics, and again, I'm waiting for a little bit of news. We'll see if we get it. But while we do, I'll remind you, if you're here on the two-way platform, you want to get into the conversation, particularly if you've never raised your hand and asked a question before, love for you to raise your hand, and we'll get to you in a moment. And we'll talk about the Middle East. We'll talk about the confirmation process, or anything else you want. But first, we're going to bring in Beverly Hallberg, a Republican strategist who joins us. Beverly, couldn't be more grateful to you for making time. Happy New Year, good evening, and welcome.
Happy New Year. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
What's on that big screen behind you?
It's my newsroom in my house.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of TV hits right in
Yeah.
front of that. So I have a
Yeah.
screen up. Usually it's a skyline, but I thought I'd put news up today, news background.
Okay, and is that those big things behind you, like really big giant pro lights?
Yes.
Professional
Yes.
lights, but you're not using them for this hit.
Not for this, because I'm using my
Okay.
computer today, have my
Got
notes.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, those are super impressive. Thank you for joining. You're a Republican, so let me ask you, are you on the scale of MAGA? If I got Liz Cheney over here and Tucker Carlson here, where would you be?
I would put myself in a principled camp. I'm conservative first. I do lean libertarian on some issues. I call balls and strikes, so I have no problem praising President or the President-elect Trump when he does something well. I have no problem criticizing him if I disagree. So that's the camp that I always fall in, and I would say the tone that I always take in my work is I am a fan of being able to discuss things in a civil way. I care about the way we talk with each other. So that is what I'm always trying to encourage with the right.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. That's consistent with what we try to do here. Delighted to hear you say that. If President Trump called you tonight and said, "What are the 2 things you're most concerned about regarding how I'm doing?" What are the 2 things you would tell him that are most concerning you?
A lot of it wouldn't be focused on policy, even though I don't fully agree with him on tariffs. So that would be one policy I don't necessarily fully agree. But I would say that it is fine to be a tough talker. Leave the insults to the side, though. There's no need to insult people.
Yeah. Are you enthusiastic about all of his cabinet nominees?
There are a lot of them that I think are really, really good picks. And there is an interesting trend, in my opinion, with how he has picked these individuals. And he wanted people who are conversationalists and people who could, I think, hold their own ground. And we're seeing that with a lot of the nominees, of course. And I know you covered this. Pete Hegseth was on yesterday, or in front of the Senate yesterday. And I think his background of being a TV host has helped him tremendously. And I know you know this, Mark, as being a professional, not just writer, but talker. When you're talking every day, doing something like going in front of the Senate, going in front of a hearing for a confirmation is much easier when you're used to talking out loud. And so I think that there has been a concerted effort by Donald Trump to look at people who have been speaking in front of the public, whether in speeches or on TV, to not just make sure that this process goes smoothly, but that his agenda is communicated effectively. And so I would say that's been one of the resounding themes. Is, you mentioned this already, very, very prepped for these hearings, each one of them, they all have a certain thing that they're doing, which is refusing to answer yes or no questions with a yes or no answer. It's always, if I'm confirmed, they say what that title would be, here's what I would do. And that's strategic because if you are cornered with a yes or no question, it usually doesn't set you up for success because it doesn't allow for any nuance. And so they're refusing to take the bait on that. And I would agree with you as well. I think some of the tactics by Democrats, in addition to questions being more in line with things Americans don't really care about, there has been that trend of not letting the person respond. I actually think that's why Senator Klobuchar, hers turned out so well, not just topically, but there was a mutual level of respect with how they interacted with each other. And she even gave Pam Bondi time to respond. And I think that's what most Americans are looking for. Not only do they want to know what type of person would you be if you are confirmed for this office, but they want to feel like there is civility left in America. And so I thought she did a great job. I don't think she was doing it for going viral. She really just wanted to hear from Pam Bondi herself.
Yeah, great point. What currently elected Democrat in terms of policy and style do you find appealing now?
Oh man, Democrats, I actually think it's really tough. It's generally more of the old school Democrats. Now, I know former Senator Joe Manchin, his style has been interesting. I know he's been on the fence as far as what party he wants to be on, but I usually think that he approaches things with a lot of respect with both sides of the aisle, which I think that we're losing right now. I do think that the younger senators, younger members of the squad, don't care for their style of communication. I do want to point out in the Senate confirmations, something that did stand out to me as far as somebody who spoke really well, and that was the interaction between Senator Duckworth and Marco Rubio. There was a really nice moment, as you mentioned, they're colleagues, where she even praised him for the fact that she was pregnant when she first became senator, and she needed the rules changed so that she could actually bring her daughter on the floor for votes. And the rules didn't allow for it at that time, and he was one defending her and pushing for that. So those are the types of things that I look for. Actually, a lot of people do get along on Capitol Hill, even if that isn't what they always do when they're speaking to the public. But anytime you see that type of civility, I think it's a good sign, but there's been a lot of hostility for quite a while.
What would you say to Democrats who don't think it's even plausible to trust Donald Trump to reach out and try to be bipartisan? Would you urge them to give him a chance, or you can understand why their skepticism is pretty all-inclusive?
Well, the thing there's so many things we could point out about Donald Trump. The reality is he's probably one of the least conservative Republicans we've had in office for quite a while as far as president. So the Republican name, he is actually willing to work with you and not stand by all the traditional Republican platform issues that former presidents have been. So if you come to the table, you're willing to work with him. I think he has proved in the past that he's willing to work with you as well. Now, there's always the other side to him where if you're not completely loyal, he may call you out. So it kind of goes both ways. But I think if you come to him in good faith, he's willing to work with you. And I would say for Democrats, a big tip, and this isn't just for working with Donald Trump, but just the whole narrative that they have towards anybody who is supporting Donald Trump is they are shooting themselves in the foot if they continue to think that people who voted for Donald Trump don't care about America. As we know, not just the Electoral College did he win, he also won the popular vote. I know plenty of people in my own family who voted for him who would have preferred Ron DeSantis, voted for Ron DeSantis in the primary, but want somebody to get this country, as they would say, back on track. They don't always love the way he talks, but they know this time around he's going to go in and say what he planned to do. They didn't know. It was kind of an unsure thing in the first term. He actually followed through on what he said he was going to do. So I would say to Democrats, if you're willing to work with him and not worry about how the media portrays you for doing so, get rid of that, actually work with him. And I'll even bring up a celebrity. Kim Kardashian did a lot of work with him when it came to criminal justice reform. Van Jones did a lot of work with him. He still praises them to this day. And so come to the table, work with him. Don't worry about how the media will categorize it. And hopefully people will start realizing he's not a Hitler that must be avoided at all cost.
Did you grow up in a Republican family?
I did. I grew up in a very liberal area in California, but I grew up in a Republican home.
Yeah. And do you have close friends who are Democrats?
I do.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
That's good. Not everyone can say that these days.
I think the benefit that I had was I grew up near San Francisco and lived in DC for over 20 years, so I was used to being around people who disagreed with me all the time.
Yeah.
It's a positive.
Good. Good example. All right. There's a new Fox News poll out tonight. One of the questions they asked was about Donald Trump and what if people approve or disapprove of the job he's doing. It's a little strange now because he's not president yet, but he's the most popular he's ever been in the Fox poll, and this is consistent with other data. 52% approve of the way he's handling the transition, 46 disapprove. And obviously being over 50 is a huge thing. And even our most popular presidents now rarely go much higher than that. Beverly, what would you say is accounting for the public's approval of how he's doing the transition? Since he's not very visible, is it because he's not visible? Is it the policy? Is it the personnel decisions? What do you think's driving his all-time high approval rating?
I think it's because he's moved so quickly. So there's an element of this where he's hit the ground running. I think part of that is he had that chance after the first administration, not really understanding how government works. Now he has a very good understanding of how it works. And so he knew how to put the pieces together. I also think his chief of staff is doing a great job trying to get this team together. And so I just think it's a lot more knowledge of government, how it works. He's doing what the people elected him to do. And I think people are pretty happy with the pick so far. I think there's another element too. It's also how the public has responded. So you see football players doing the Trump dance. You see people not being afraid to say that they support Donald Trump. And so I think there's a huge shift in the country where people can finally say, I approve of this. This is what I'm looking for. And so I think you're seeing a whole tonal shift as a whole, and that's working out well for him.
Okay. I've got it, unless I change my mind, just one more question for Beverly now, and then we're going to bring folks in. So again, if you'd like to be part of the conversation on any topic, please raise your electronic hand. How do you feel and how do you think about the tableau we're expected to see on Monday of Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos standing up there supporting Donald Trump, or at least being present to commemorate his inaugural? How do you feel about that? Is that good for the country? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? How do you feel about their support for Donald Trump?
I feel good. I think the Mark Zuckerberg story is the most interesting. We know that Elon has attached himself to Donald Trump for quite a while. Of course, his big purchase of Twitter, changing it to X a couple years ago, huge, huge move for him where he also lost a lot of money. Mark Zuckerberg joining forces, I think, shows a sea shift. And I'll say this is where the conservative principles in me come out. I am very thankful that Republicans, and this is something Republicans, Democrats tend to agree on, is that they didn't use government to regulate big tech. I am a firm believer that the free market sorts things out. People will go for what they want to buy. Mark Zuckerberg is doing this because he feels free with the new administration and that they are not going to come down on him and tell him what he has to monitor, the fact checkers, all of this. So I think it's a very good moment for free speech. I hope that we see more of that. I do love the community notes aspect of what Twitter does and what Mark Zuckerberg is actually kind of ripping off from Elon Musk, is using community notes so that people can put their content there. But we can trust people more to want to find the real news and make decisions for themselves. Of course, people are going to look at, well, here are these very wealthy corporate individuals who are up there. I'm a supporter of business as long as they are operating in above board means. I'm a fan of seeing business owners up there working alongside Donald Trump.
So I'm a big supporter of business, and I'm a big supporter of the First Amendment. But I want to ask you about two issues and ask if you are absolutist in saying no government intervention. Okay. One is social media content for kids. Do you think the federal government should just stay absolutely out of it, or is that an area where you'd bend your rule?
That is an area where I would say when you're talking about minors, there is an interest of government to protect children. So I think putting some parameters, like even the Supreme Court was looking at porn and whether or not there has to be certain measures to be able to prove that you were 18 years of age. I am for those checks, especially for children. There is a role government needs to play to protect children.
Okay. And what about banning TikTok?
That one is tricky because of the Chinese government angle. I'll be honest, I'm not a fan of banning TikTok. I think we should allow it, but I also think the more that we can push for US companies to get involved, and I think this is another part, they are pushing certain algorithms that are not good for children. So there is
Yeah.
an element where they are trying to change the minds of children. It is complex, it's complicated, but I also don't like the idea of banning TikTok.
Yeah. And lastly, on this issue,
Mhm.
again, I'm a big believer in freedom, and I think those companies are great American jewels, right? I mean, just
Yeah.
phenomenal. Uh, they are basically monopolies, right? Google's basically a search monopoly, right? Um, it, it, so in that case, it may be less about speech than it is about antitrust. So
Right.
can you see intervention with, say, Google or Facebook or Instagram to say there needs to be federal government intervention because they're just too powerful in the market?
And so this is where I would say, if that were true, then why did Mark Zuckerberg change his mind on how he ran his company? If Google is the absolute only way to search for content, I would agree with you because I'm against monopolies. There are alternatives out there. I would even point to legacy media. Some would have said a long time ago with just ABC, NBC, and let's say even the advent of the 24-hour news networks that we need to break this up because it's not enough information getting out there. Well, look at Joe Rogan's podcast. Look at the information you're putting out. I think as long as they're an avenue for people to compete, you don't have government intervene.
If I asked you how big a market share Google has, how would you find the answer?
Oh,
You'd
I
go
would
on
have to ask a
Google.
scholar. I'm not going to Google it. I'm going to
You
ask a
wouldn't Google
scholar
it?
who works now.
The correct answer is you go on Bing. I mean, they're effective a monopoly. They have so much of the market,
They
and
do.
and uh, and I've said this before. I think that the most underpaid lobbyists in Washington are for Facebook and Google because they've done an incredible job of avoiding any regulation, even on kids stuff, and they've done it by pretending that they want to be regulated and then knowing that they can
And
outwit members of Congress.
I'm not saying there's no regulations whatsoever. These companies already have a lot of regulations on them. There's a place for
Yeah.
good regulation in any industry for protecting the public. But I think when you're talking about regulating big tech, the bills that have been pushed forward, what a lot of members of Congress talking about, it's government dictating too much of how these businesses run. I always think it's interesting when you do have conservatives, Republicans push for this because they usually talk about small, limited government. So it pushes up against that. These are complex issues, though, especially with social media, the technology itself. It's hard to keep up. And I even think maybe it's a reason why term limits are important because the older you get, the harder it is to follow all this stuff.
Yeah,
You see your
absolutely.
grandkids and children being able to use technology pretty easily, but it is pretty complex, the issues themselves.
All right, Beverly, thank you. Really happy to have you here. I'm going to bring
Thank
folks in.
you.
I'll tell you, in the Fox poll, Joe Biden's favorability at 40%, 40%, unfavorable 59%. Not the way he wanted to end his presidency. And I would be really super curious to see in 90 minutes how he frames the end of this thing. All right, Lindsay, welcome. Thank you for joining. Tell folks who don't know where you are and your question or comment, hopefully directed directly at Beverly so I can check my email.
Okay, it was kind of about the hostage deal in that. So
Okay, sure.
maybe she
Go
can
ahead.
answer. But yeah, my name's Lindsay. I'm from Central Illinois. I was on a couple nights ago, maybe last week. But yeah, I was gonna ask. I feel like everybody keeps comparing this to the hostage situation to Carter and Reagan, and that inauguration. And I was just wondering, like, I wasn't around at the time, how similar it is in terms of, like, was Reagan also using extremely hard language? Did he also have ambassadors kind of in the room or people in the room negotiating through the time? Was there kind of a split over credit at the time like we're seeing now? And I feel like historically we kind of, at least from what I've heard, people remember it as Reagan got it done. And so I was wondering if that might be the same long term if we think if it looks like we remember it as Trump got this done, even though there's a split over credit now. So I was just going to ask about that. And then I was also curious if there was any, like, if Haley was on here or any Israelis that could talk about. I've seen a lot of tweets about some Israelis really not liking the hostage deal and kind of the terms and stuff like that. So I didn't know if you guys had perspective on that, or if anybody was on there that could speak to that.
We love treating Haley like she's the ambassador from Israel. So let's bring her in. Haley, how are you? Thank you, Lindsay, for that. I'll get back to your first question in a minute, but since Haley's here and always is happy to help us out, Haley, how are you feeling about the deal? What have you seen or heard from Israel to give us a sense of what's happening?
Yeah, so it's really complicated how I'm feeling. I know just from based on Israeli media, it's also very split down the middle. Israelis, like the hostage families themselves, most of them are not happy at all. Given, they wanted a deal where all the hostages get out at one time and not the ones that take place over the next, I think it's 45 days or 60 days or something like that. The Israeli public is very happy with the deal because Israel just wants to start healing, start moving on, start being able to just come back together as a country again. So it's very split. Personally, it's, for me, complicated. Like I said, I want anybody that we can get home at, as soon as possible. Anyone who's still alive, obviously, I want back as soon as possible. But the question is what happens now with after stage one? What happens with stage two? I don't think Israelis have a high, like, they expect the second stage to start. I think a lot of them are pretty pessimistic about the stages. So I think most of us are really just crossing our fingers, hoping that after the first stage is done, that the next stage will happen, because then we have the soldiers and the men who are going to be released second. And so nobody wants to keep anybody back, but we're just basically crossing our fingers, like, let's get through the first stage, and then we just want to keep going. So that's basically where I think we stand.
Yeah, a really great summary. Lindsay, follow-up question for Haley?
No, I think that was great. I've seen like so much, and I think a couple days ago when there were talks about what was going to come out and what was in it. I saw a lot of like anger from a lot of Israeli people on my Twitter. So I was just curious as to how you viewed that. And there's obviously the issue of whether Hamas will stick by it or anything like that.
Exactly. That's the big, like, it's one of the big ifs of this whole deal is if Hamas sticks to everything, then the second stage will go by, normally, and we won't have anything. So, but
I guess I do. Can I ask you a follow-up question? I do have one.
Yeah.
They say they're voting on it in Israel tomorrow, right? Do you expect that to go through?
The coalition and has enough votes for it to pass. Like, on the Israeli side, there's nobody who suspects that we're not going to accept it, as much as, the world wants to say it was all Israel's fault. But there's nothing in the media or anybody saying that there's people who are going to like upstate, try and stop it or anything. So it's going to be signed. It's going to be done. It's just Americans are like so happy, like I can see like on Twitter, like Right America, like MAGA America, like they're so happy that this is being done. But for Israeli Americans, it's a pretty complicated feeling, I think.
Haley, you're practically a co-host of the program, but for those people who are joining tonight and don't know, explain your connection to the United States and Israel.
Sure. I was born and raised in New York for 17 years. I moved to Israel when I was 17. I lived there for 12 years. So basically lived half my life here and in the US. So I am basically half and half Israeli American, as much as can possibly be. Yeah. And I served in the IDF. The whole family did, and everything.
Before we move back to Lindsay's first historical question, Beverly, do you have either comments on what the lady said or question for either of them?
Yeah, I'll just say on this Israel deal, I agree. I think there's mixed emotions because the question is whether or not Hamas will follow through with the other two stages. I think another interesting side to this too is that the president-elect Donald Trump did say there would be hell to pay if not all the hostages were returned by the time he took office. So that hasn't happened. So where is his red line on this? I mean, he did put out on Truth Social that he's happy about it. So he may view this as, well, they're all coming home eventually. So that's enough. I think the thing I'm watching for most, and this is what I saw on X that people were talking for, is whether or not those two children, the Bibas children with the red hair, whether or not they're going to make it back. That baby was the youngest hostage. I think it'll be a huge day to for celebration and victory. A lot of people are praying for those children if they come back alive. So I think that's going to be the big moment.
Yeah.
So just
Haley, yeah, go
based
ahead,
off
Haley.
of those, Ariel and Shiri and Fear, those are the family. They are on the list to be expected to come back. The whole thing is like a big if. What are the situation? How are they? What are their statuses, if they're alive, if they're dead? That's what Israel, like, it's a great thing, but it's that big question mark, like, who's coming back alive or dead? It's just a horrible, horrible feeling. I'm sorry, I'm done.
Yeah, no, that's okay. One of the things I was really troubled by today, at least last night I checked in, was a lack of clarity about which of the hostages are alive and which ones are in severe, condition or not. You'd like to think that in a negotiation where one party is representing they're going to return them, they'd be a little bit more forthcoming about that. So I find that a little troubling.
Absolutely.
Haley, thank you. Lindsay, the answer to your first series of questions, I have to say, I have some knowledge about this. I wasn't old enough. I wasn't a journalist then. Here's my sense of it. There may be somebody on here who knows more and they'll raise their hand to help, but it wasn't as explicit, right? There wasn't nearly as much transparency about diplomacy as there is now. I don't believe you saw a Reagan representative sitting with a Carter representative. I may be wrong, but I've never heard that as part of it. But it was. I think the reason people are making the comparison so directly is it was clear that or I should say, it appeared clear that President Carter was not going to solve this on his own, that it was going to go until Reagan, and that the same dynamic existed, which is even though President Reagan didn't make a threat than President-elect Reagan, the way President-elect Trump did about retribution if it wasn't solved by the time he was sworn in, it was clear that there was going to be a new sheriff in town, and that the dynamics that had led to the stalemate were going to be broken either before or after President Reagan took office. And for whatever reason, and I don't know, this may be on the historical record, the Iranians decided to do it before. And similar to what's happened here is President Carter and his team said, we set this in motion, we worked diligently at it over and over, and it happened on our watch. And the Reagan people said, well, it only happened on your watch because our watch was coming up. And I think that in terms of history, today, sitting here, not just in the snapshot of their approval ratings, but because of how President Biden's presidency ended, I think it's going to be. It'd be hard to say today, and not just how it ended, but unlike President Carter, who was an ex-president for decades, Joe Biden's not going to be with us for very much longer, right? So he's not going to have an opportunity to do much to shape his presidency going forward. Where we sit today, I don't think his presidency will be seen in that great a light. Now, if President Trump is a disaster as president, and history says he's a horrible second-term president, I don't think that's going to rehabilitate Joe Biden. I think just the opposite, because I think one of the big things that history is going to say incredulously is 3 years ago, 75% of the people said he was too old to run again, and yet he kept going. And young people, overwhelming numbers said he was too old to serve a second term. So that decision, regardless of whether President Trump is a success or a failure, I think people will not look kindly on that. And then again, the fundamental things he failed on, despite his denial of failure, that allowed President Trump to win, I don't think there's any revisionism on the Afghanistan withdrawal, on inflation, on the open border, and on some of the cultural things that were unpopular. I just can't imagine history suddenly saying those were good decisions or well executed. And I continue to be just amazed that he fired no one. There's not a single person fired for incompetence. People have raised some people who've been fired for other issues, but not one person was fired in this administration because they didn't do a good job. And I've never heard of that. I just never heard of that in a presidency. And I think again, he's not gonna look well. Regarding this stalemate, it's very hard for American presidents to have leverage over Bibi. It's just very hard because Bibi plays the game like he's playing eight-dimensional chess, and he understands American politics perfectly, and it's very difficult to force his hand. But I think Joe Biden has been, in part because of pressure from the American left, I think he's been particularly weak, even though he knows Bibi well and understands him, well, like Secretary Clinton and George Bush, both George Bushes. He's a hard nut to crack, and I think again, Joe Biden fancied himself a great foreign policy master, and he could not solve this. He could not solve it. Beverly, your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think when we look at Biden and his legacy, it's not going to look favorably on him. Like you said, unlike Carter, he doesn't have this time to really shape that legacy in other ways as he moves forward. But I think we're going to look back on this time, especially the Afghanistan just horrific withdrawal, as being one of the main things we remember about President Biden. And I do agree. I think it's the more extreme left wing of the Democratic Party that has made it very hard for Joe Biden to negotiate. I know Kamala Harris even struggled to talk about Hamas and Israel when she was running for the presidency as well. And I don't think that's even where Joe Biden is himself personally on this issue. I think he's very pro-Israel, but he felt hamstrung with it. But the reality is when you're in this type of position, you have to stand firm, even if certain people get upset with you. I think he tried to appease too many people in his presidency and wasn't strong enough in the areas that he needed to be. So I'll leave the history lesson to Mark. He knows that much better than I do. But as far as what we'll say about Joe Biden, I don't think we'll look friendly on this administration.
Yeah. I always say to people, in school, when you learn history, you tend to not, because there's snow days, you end up not getting up to the near present. And so I know more about Johnson, Nixon, Kennedy than I do about Reagan, because Reagan's right between where my schooling ended and when I started covering first president I covered, not full time, but I was in journalism was Bush 41. So I know about the Reagan years, but not with the level of recall and education that I should, because I've got like a Reagan gap. Lindsay and Haley, thank you both. Really appreciate it. Thank you for joining. And we'll all keep our fingers crossed there. My friend Ray Marcano, journalist in the Buckeye State. Ray, welcome back. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Mark. I have a question for you and Beverly, and that is there anybody in the Democratic Party that can tell their colleagues to grow up? Over the last week, it's just been one thing after another, whether it's Joe Biden and today's Washington Post interview and her behavior towards Kamala Harris and the dance thing, Michelle Obama not wanting to show up to the inauguration. We should be focusing on the inauguration of a new president, but instead we're spending a lot of our time focusing on pettiness. And that pettiness, while it's being played in a lot of areas as something that's harmful to the Democratic Party, I actually think it's harmful to our democracy because we have a number of issues that we have to take care of and fix. And whether or not you like it, Donald Trump's the president, and we got to help him fix those problems. So is there anybody out there right now that can say, guys, grow up?
So it's a great question. It has long been the case that the dominance of the Clintons, the Obamas, the Bidens, the Pelosi's, uh, uh, it has kept this new generation from going forward. And, Chuck Schumer's not young, particularly young either. Um, and you've got young leaders like Hakeem Jeffries, like Ro Khanna, like Richie Torres. There are young leaders who are out there, but the big powerful people who've been powerful for decades still take up so much space, and and the behavior that you cite on behalf of these folks, I don't think makes the younger people in the party anxious to keep them around. Just the opposite. But you got to be an aircraft carrier to play at the level those folks played at. And as talented as some of the younger people in the party are, they don't have the relationship with the American people, the fundraising capacity, the ability to command the spotlight. So I think this is to me, we've talked here about who should be the DNC chair, and these folks who are talking about mechanics. They don't want to be big spokespeople on issues. They want to, efficiently run the party and raise the money and all that. I really do think the vacuum's quite big. And I've said before, it is the rare governor who can claim that spotlight on a regular enough basis to supplant somebody like a former president. So I agree with you. It's a big problem. And that Joe Biden interview in the Washington Post, we talked about it on the morning meeting. It's more of the grievance. And I'll tell you, we don't know, no one I know knows exactly what's going on between Kamala Harris and Jill and Joe Biden. But it does not appear that they're ending, and despite what their spokespeople say, on a particularly close note. And they're setting the example, unfortunately. Beverly, thoughts?
I think all you had to do is look at Jimmy Carter's funeral to take a look at the Clintons. You had Barack Obama there, of course, Kamala Harris and her husband, Doug Emhoff, and there is no love lost between these individuals. So I think from a top-down aspect, this party is in trouble because there is a lot of bad blood, especially not just the way that the election went for Democrats as far as Joe getting pushed out, Kamala coming in, nobody being really happy about that entire process. But also, they did the one thing that you should never do as far as Democrats are concerned, and that is they lost to Donald Trump. So I think Monday, Inauguration Day, is going to be a very bitter day. I hope we do get more news about Michelle Obama. I'm somewhat a little bit concerned about her as far as why she hasn't been showing up to events. I hope she's healthy and everything is okay. But I think when you have this top-down problem, when the Democrat Party has been run by this older generation, you have a gap that needs to be filled and it hasn't been filled. And so I think it's going to be a grassroots effort building. And I think the younger Democrats need to not focus so much on social media, but actually, as Mark was just saying, the fundraising, really working on building the Democrat Party from the ground up is going to be important. But they're in a bad place right now.
Ray, thank you as always. Great to have you here. Dan, welcome, and tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind, please.
Yeah, my name's Dan. I'm Collier. I'm from North Alabama. I was just listening, and I was 18 when Reagan was elected. I remember it very well. That the helicopters crashing in the desert, people very upset about the way Carter was handling things. The investment in the military seemed to be way off what it should be to most people. What and it seemed like people were afraid of Reagan. Like, when they had this kind of feeling that as soon as Reagan gets in there, he's going to unleash the military on Iran and get those hostages back. And so, the fact that they let him out like right before he was inaugurated was pretty amazing, actually. And I think most people gave him credit for getting the hostages out. That wasn't Carter at all. But that was just my perception at the time as an 18-year-old.
Yeah, I think it's generally again very similar. The incumbent had the opportunity to do it over a long period of time, and it only happened at the end for a reason, not because the incumbent suddenly figured out the solution that they'd been stymied on.
And these Democratic senators, I tell you, one thing that's refreshing about Fetterman is he seems to just talk. He just contemporaneously from the notes he has in his head. But if you watch them, they're like reading. They've got prepared comments that they just sit there and read, and it doesn't appear to me that they actually know the information. And the people that actually know the information come across much more uh, intelligent than they do. And so they need to stop that and the attacks because
do you like any Democratic senators now except for Fetterman?
No, honestly, they all seem to be pretty rabid. And, you have to think about it. They've spent 8 years, just attacking Trump. That's the only weapon they've got is just, we're going to attack Trump. We're going to attack Trump. We're going to call him Hitler, whatever. And so they don't really know where to go now that he's been elected and has a majority of the vote. So,
Dan, thank you for joining. Appreciate the comment. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, Hassan, welcome in. Happy New Year to you. Tell folks who don't know where you are and what's on your mind. And I know you've got a rich history I'm hoping you're about to share with us.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm in Costa Rica, as a matter of fact, and here for the next couple of months. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this was answered because I went off the Zoom, the YouTube, and came on the Zoom. So my point is twofold. One, at the time of the hostage release back during the Carter administration, uh, the desire on the part of the Iranian government at that point was not to give Carter any credit for anything. And if you recall, the airplane with the hostages was kept on the tarmac in Tehran until Reagan was actually inaugurated. And literally moments after the inauguration, the airplane took off with the hostages. There was also some suspicion that's never been, clarified one way or the other, that there was a desire on the part of the Reagan campaign not to see a hostage release that would have been the proverbial October surprise.
Right.
And that Bill Casey, who was heavily involved with the Reagan campaign at the time and then subsequently became the director of the CIA, had a hand in ensuring that the hostages were not released until such time. That's never been confirmed one way or the other. And certainly Casey said that was never the case, and the Reagan administration denied it fulsomely. But going back to this question about the comparison to now and 40 some odd years ago, there was a great deal of animosity between the revolutionaries in Khomeini not wanting to give Carter the benefit of the release of the hostages until after he was out of office.
Right. Yeah, and as you point out, the Casey thing has never been solved, but it wouldn't necessarily be required because the Iranians already had the same point of view, which is they weren't interested in giving Carter an October surprise that would have helped him.
Correct.
Yeah. Let me ask you both, because we're running out of time. Are you guys going to watch the inauguration?
Am I going to? If I can get it down here in Costa Rica, I will absolutely watch the inauguration.
Yeah. If President Trump asked you to give him either a theme or a line for his speech, what would you tell him?
Unity.
Yeah.
Not as what was it that George W. Bush said? What is this dark shit that we're listening to? I would hope that his speech would be much more uplifting and unifying than the first time around.
Yeah, whatever the opposite of American carnage is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for joining and sharing the history with us. Very grateful to you. And hope, as always, you'll come back.
Thank you.
Beverly, where are you going to watch the inauguration?
Pennsylvania Avenue. So I'm going to be on the parade route, going to be up in a building looking down. So I'm excited to see the whole festivities. It should be a good day.
Yeah. And what do you think about the Sunday night rally in the arena? Does that worry you a little bit that might be less unifying?
Hey, they're there to celebrate. I'm not going to be attending anything other than inaugural day, probably because I'm old now and that sounds exhausting to go to everything. But inaugural day is where I'll be. I do think, though, that this is a president who likes to celebrate this country. I think the 250th anniversary of America and him being president during that's going to be a huge celebration. And so that's what this president does. It's going to be a big party. And I think the focus is going to be on celebrating America.
Is there any political or entertainment celebrity who you'd like to run into?
Ooh, that is a great question. Who do I really want to see? Hey, if I had to meet somebody, it might as well be Carrie Underwood. I'm used to the politicians. Give me the musician. I would love to.
Well, but there are a lot of tech people. Like, you ever met Zuckerberg or Musk?
True. I would love to meet Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. That as well. That would be great.
Okay. Well, I wish you luck. So grateful to you for joining. Again, I love your emphasis on unity and honesty and communication between the parties. So we hope you'll come back on a regular basis.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Tonight, let's get a little preview from my colleague Dan, because if you can't get it, is Dan gone? Dan maybe left. He was here. All right. Dan Turntine is going to be on. Somebody help me out. Dr. Phil's network tonight at
Merritt Street.
Merritt Street. Thank you. Dan is going to be on Merritt Street at 8 o'clock, and I'm going to be in Newsmax at 8 o'clock. So Dan and I will be going head to head. Yes, I'll be checking the Nielsen ratings and see who does better. Grateful to everybody for joining. A reminder, if you can be in DC or you live in DC on February 2nd, that's a Sunday, special live edition of the morning meeting. Dan Sean and myself will be in Washington at the, what's that thing called? Street Warehouse, Pearl Street Warehouse. I haven't been there, but I hear it's incredible. 5 o'clock Eastern time, local time. You can come by. We'll do a show live. We'll take questions. You'll meet other members of the two-way community, some special guests. I'm looking forward to it. I hope everybody can come. Tickets are selling now. Go to Two-Way TV if you'd like to join us. And pretty soon I'm not going to be making this promotional announcement because we'll be sold out. So if you are in DC or want to come to DC for the event, please go buy your tickets now. Back tomorrow, 7 a.m. Eastern time on the morning meeting, 9 a.m. Eastern time. Sorry. Dan, Sean, and I might have a good story for you. I'm still working on it. I got some reporting during the show, but I didn't have time to follow up on it, so I'll do that now. But whether we have news or not, we'll have plenty to talk about. So 9 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow, morning meeting, and then 6 o'clock tomorrow night back here for this program. Very grateful to everybody, Beverly in particular, for spending the hour with us, and for everybody who asked questions. I hope you have a good evening. I'll see you at 8 o'clock with Rob Finnerty, and then again tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Have a good evening.